Hey, so this video is just going to go over how to look for players that you want to target in a trade. I had the question a couple times in the comments recently. A couple people said they'd like to see a video on just kind of how I find the players I trade for in my OSIM. So in my Orioles franchise, I don't really go into the details of how I look for players or how the deal comes together always. I don't really be like, well, I made this deal or here's an exact deal I'm thinking of making. Whereas the actual kind of finding the deal, I guess, people thought it might be helpful to do that, in addition to the already kind of like trading for superstars video I use where you can do the make this work now stuff and the shop a player, all that. So there's some of that involved, but, first I'll show you one trade where I kind of did it more, I don't know, by the book or, more of a standard trade. So this is a guy I traded, Livian Delgado. I traded my OSIM last season. I knew I was going to trade him and because he's on the last year of his deal and I needed to get something for him. And I also had a pitching prospect. You can see this guy, Kelvin Aponte, who basically was pretty far away from the majors. And I'm going to win now mode. And and a lot of teams were asking about him, and I was just willing to deal him. So for this deal, what I did was I just Delgado and Aponte, or Apont maybe it is, I just shopped them, which I wouldn't recommend doing with like your top players like Delgado is, and maybe even your top prospects, although prospects seem to be less concerned with being shopped around. But these were two guys I was willing to deal, and I just wanted to see kind of like if there was any superstar pitcher that was offered right up, and there were like three of them. Three pitchers who were probably top 20 pitchers in the league were brought back, were mentioned as possibly coming back, and I actually ended up going to one of the teams and trading for a different one of their top pitchers instead that they didn't have in the trade that I then threw a third piece in for. So, I shopped Delgado and a Pont, and the Giants came up with offering me a couple really good pitchers, but not this one, Aguilar. But I went to their team because I saw they obviously really liked those two guys and said, well, this is actually the pitcher that I want. And it only took me, a decent outfield prospect additionally to do that. So you can always do that. You can always shop a guy and not with the intention of saying these are the guys I'm going to get, but to figure out which teams are most interested. So that's what I did in that trade. Another thing that is helpful in the sim, let me do it this way. So I'm actually after the trade deadline, but if you go to the player trade tab and then strength overview, I'm sure most people playing the game have probably used this. You see the 1 through 30 catchers, 1 through 30 first basemen. So I think these rankings are helpful as kind of a loose guide, kind of like this. In my other videos, I've talked about this overall player rating. Like, sure, it can be helpful to ballpark a bunch of players, but you really want to get into the stats and the individual ratings. I'd say the same thing for these rankings. They just change. They fluctuate a little bit too much for me. I mean, the guy who's, this number one guy is going to be number one or the top few for a while. But in the middle range, I don't know, maybe like 6 through 20 or something, right? I just find that there's a lot of fluctuation. So I wouldn't say like, oh, I'm going to get the 5th best catcher in baseball, because in like 2 months, they might say he's like the 13th best catcher. So use it as a guide to kind of get a pecking order and then dig into each guy. So I made a trade in my OSIM recently for a third baseman, and I really just, and I knew I needed a second baseman or a third baseman. So I really just, and one more thing. I wanted them to be right-handed too. So what I did was I went through all these players and the top 10 or so, and I basically, what I would do is I'd see who was right-handed, and I'd go to this guy, and then I'd go to trade this player, and of course I'm after the trade deadline, and then I would try to figure out what that team wanted. And so and I've gone into other videos in terms of how I figure out the asking price for players and all that. This video is more just about how to find the guys. So the strength overview is a big piece. I just say, again, be careful with be mindful with these rankings that they're going to change a bunch, and they're not, don't take them as Bible, and there's a lot of variation in them. Get them to give you a loose guide of like who the player is, or when you want to upgrade a position, just like, look at the guys, the top 20 or something maybe, and figure out who suits your needs, and then figure out the price for each of them. So really what I did with the second baseman and the third baseman is I found like the 5 that I was most interested in and fiddled around with the price and found, ended up finding the best deal for me. Another thing you can do is you can just go to each team, really. You can do it from the trade screen. You can do it like this. Basically, you can go to pitching ratings, right? And sort by overall and just kind of go through each team. Like I'll go like, all right, Arizona, what are we looking at here? And sort their thing. And so this is what I've done before when I've been looking for like a top pitcher in the offseason when I was trying to bring in like an ace pitcher. I would just kind of go through and I'd go through each team like this and kind of look at them. And there are other ways you can do this. You can go through them on the trade screen as well. You could also go to the league statistics page. I'll show you that in a second, and sort every pitcher. I find it easier. I just find it easier to go team by team. I don't know. It takes a little longer, I guess, but it's the way just kind of the habit. What am I trying to say? The habit of how I do it, the habit I formed a while ago of how I do it, even though looking at the statistics might be easier. So I just kind of go through each team, right? But maybe not if I'm making a smaller trade, but if I'm looking to make a big trade and I know I'm going to give up a lot, I'll go through and I'll find guys and be like, cool, does this guy suit my needs? Is he in the kind of level of player that I want? And I'll make a list of 5, 6, 10 guys and go then to the trade screen and try to figure out what the team wants from them. Sometimes you'll find like, oh, well, this guy's surprisingly cheap. And sometimes you find like, oh, well, this team is definitely not moving any of their top pitchers. So you can also do that by going here to statistics, and you can go to sortable stats. And then you can see here, we're going to do it by pitching. So we're going to go to pitching ratings and say I'm looking for a starting pitcher, right? And you can sort by overall if you'd like. I always like to sort by movement first because I play in Camden Yards and I need dudes who will cut down on the home runs. You can see like this guy's on my team. Number 1 is, 3 is, 4 is, 5 is, 6 is. Yeah, I target movement pitchers in Camden Yards, and it helps me a lot in terms of keeping the home runs down. And so, that's kind of it. Just, I know that's not incredibly complicated, but since, might not be all that helpful, but hopefully it is. Hopefully that's kind of along the lines of what people are asking. So again, if you're certain you're going to trade somebody, the shop a player tool can always work, and you can shop 2 players at once. The strength overview is kind of like a helpful guide that will help ballpark kind of the players that might suit your needs. And then really just the more tedious one is, I've done it several times, especially at the trade deadline or in the offseason. I'll go through each team. Especially for pitchers, because, and I forgot to include this kind of little tidbit of why I do it for pitchers, because when you go to pitchers with the strength overview, they just list 1 starter and 1 reliever and 1 closer for each team. So that's why I do it that way. So yeah, that's I think that's the end of this video. Any questions about this, or if I kind of, skimmed over anything? I know it's past the trade deadline, so I didn't show you the trade screen, but didn't really need it in this one. But let me know if I left anything unanswered here that would be helpful.